Marvel Studios has spent years telling us who the most powerful hero in the MCU is, and every time, the answer changes. But what if I told you the real answer just walked onto the screen in Spider-Man Brand New Day, and almost nobody noticed? Her name is Jean Grey, and if you know anything about comic book history, you know that name doesn't just mean powerful, it means something closer to apocalyptic. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why this one character could break the entire power scale of the MCU, why Marvel buried her origin instead of explaining it, and why her comic book story is actually far darker and far bigger than anything the movie showed you. Let's start from zero. In the comics, every mutant power traces back to one thing, a dominant mutated gene sitting inside their DNA. That gene doesn't activate the moment a mutant is born. It usually stays dormant until puberty. But there's a second trigger, one that's rarer and far more brutal: severe trauma, a shock big enough to rewire a child's mind overnight. That's exactly what happens to Jean Grey. She's 9 years old. She's playing outside with her best friend, a girl named Annie. Jean throws a frisbee, it lands in the middle of the road, and without thinking, Annie runs after it. A car comes out of nowhere. Jean watches her best friend die right in front of her. But here's the part that makes it so much worse. The trauma is so intense that Jean's mutant gene activates on the spot, and in that split second, she involuntarily forms a psychic connection with Annie as she's dying. Jean doesn't just witness her friend's death, she feels it happen to her own body. A 9-year-old girl experiencing that kind of psychic overload doesn't just grieve, she shuts down completely. She stops responding to her own parents, doctors, psychiatrists, neurologists. Her family tries everyone, and nothing works. Until Charles Xavier shows up at their door. When Xavier walks into Jean's room for the first time, the walls around her are already cracked, damage caused by a psychic power she doesn't even understand yet, let alone control. Xavier talks to her, slowly earns her trust, and convinces her parents to let him train her. Over time, he helps Jean get a grip on her telepathy and telekinesis, both of which are already operating at a level most adult mutants never reach. Eventually, Xavier decides she's ready for a real test and takes her out into a crowded public space. For a few minutes, she holds it together. Then a kid runs past her, breaks her concentration completely, and the moment her focus slips, the floodgates open. She starts hearing every single thought from every single person around her, all at once, with no way to shut it out. She panics, loses control of her powers, and ends up throwing the entire crowd into the air. Xavier gets her home safely, but he immediately admits the mistake was his. He pushed her into fieldwork before she was ready. So instead of rushing things, he goes back to basics, working with Jean patiently until her powers evolve into what we eventually recognize as one of the most formidable psychic skill sets in the Marvel Universe. But there's a second thing Xavier does during this period that matters even more. He installs mental blocks in Jean's mind. Here's why that's necessary. Jean's raw potential is so extreme that even as an adult, intense emotional trauma can cause her psychic abilities to essentially take over her own decision-making. So Xavier places these blocks. Think of them like vault doors, sealing away a portion of her true power so she can function normally. With the blocks in place, her telepathy becomes more restrained, and her telekinesis becomes her primary tool. She uses it to protect people, to save lives, and eventually becomes a founding member of Xavier's original team, known then as Marvel Girl, with a close bond to Cyclops that gets established almost immediately. Now here's where the story stops being about a talented young mutant and starts becoming something far bigger: the Phoenix Force. If you've watched any X-Men movie, you've heard the name. What you probably haven't gotten is an actual explanation, because even the films never really nail it down. So let's fix that. The Phoenix Force is one of the most powerful cosmic entities in the entire Marvel Universe. It represents chaos, destruction, and rebirth, all rolled into one. It doesn't have a fixed form. It travels across the cosmos, and wherever it senses something that, in its judgment, shouldn't exist anymore, it consumes it and starts over. Jean Grey becomes its perfect host, and there's a very specific reason why. Her DNA carries a natural affinity for the Phoenix Force, unlike anything else in the Marvel Universe. The turning point comes during a space mission. The X-Men's ship gets critically damaged after a fight with a villain who escapes at the last second, leaving them stranded with no way to survive. Jean tries to use her telepathy to save everyone, and in doing so, unknowingly opens a psychic channel straight to the Phoenix Force. The Phoenix recognizes an ideal host and offers Jean a choice: give up her body, and the rest of the X-Men live. Jean agrees. What happens next gets explained differently across different retellings, but the core idea stays the same. Jean's physical body is too fragile to contain the full Phoenix Force, so it's placed into a healing cocoon to recover, while the Phoenix creates a clone of Jean to walk around in. version, powered by only a fraction of its full strength. Even a fraction is enough to make her one of the most dangerous beings alive. This is the first time we see Jean fused with the Phoenix, but that clone is inexperienced, and a group of mutants led by Emma Frost and the Hellfire Club exploit that inexperience. Using psychic manipulation, they trap Jean in a series of illusions that convince her the people she loves are dead or against her. Believing Cyclops has been killed, she turns on her own team, and this is the moment she transforms into Dark Phoenix, one of the single most destructive villains the Marvel Universe has ever produced. Eventually, that storyline gets resolved, though the full details are a saga in their own right. What matters for our purposes is simple. Jean Grey has an almost unmatched bond with the Phoenix Force, and it's a bond that keeps resurfacing throughout her entire history. Now, Spider-Man, Brand New Day, introduced another character connected to Jean, her sister, Sara Grey. And this is where things get genuinely surprising, because Sara exists in the comics too, though she barely had a role until very recently. In the comics, Sara doesn't originally have telepathic powers like the movie suggests. What she does have is total, unconditional love for her sister, and she becomes one of the most vocal public supporters of mutant rights anywhere in the Marvel Universe. That advocacy is ultimately what gets her killed. A villain kidnaps her and infects her with a techno-organic entity known as the Faceless, essentially a hive mind organism, and Sara doesn't survive it. Jean tries to save her, but arrives too late. For years, that's where the story stayed. Sara, gone. But in very recent comic storylines, something changes. Jean's connection to the Phoenix Force evolves to a level even beyond her previous peaks. She becomes what's known as the White Phoenix of the Crown, essentially the purest, most elevated form the Phoenix Force can take. At that level, Jean gains the power to rewrite reality itself, and she uses it to bring Sara back to life. Not only that, she gives her sister actual mutant powers for the first time, the ability to sense other mutants' abilities, and Sara takes on a new codename, Beacon. So here's the thing to understand. The version of Sara Grey we saw in Brand New Day didn't have powers in her original comic form. She does now, and only because Jean became powerful enough to bend reality to bring her back. That single detail should tell you everything about how far this character's ceiling actually goes. Which brings us back to the MCU. We've just been introduced to Sadie Sinkler's Jean Grey. My read is that this is a foundation move. Marvel is almost certainly setting her up to reappear in Secret Wars, planting the roots of a mutant-driven world before handing the baton to a solo X-Men film. And because a massive chunk of the audience is going to watch Secret Wars regardless, that solo film gets to skip the awkward reintroduction problem entirely. Audiences will already know exactly who these characters are, which means the post-Endgame identity vacuum that hurt the MCU for years simply won't repeat itself here. We also got a glimpse in Brand New Day of how they're evolving her powers early, which tracks with the comics almost exactly. Jean starts out isolated until she finds Charles Xavier and his school, a school that doesn't technically exist in the MCU yet. But if Doctor Doom really is about to build a battle world, it would make total sense for mutants to get their own corner of it, and for Xavier's school to finally take root there. The only real question left is timing. When does Jean actually get the Phoenix Force? FDX already tried their own rushed version of the Phoenix Saga a few years back, and we all remember how that went. So my hope is that Marvel Studios takes its time here, because done right, this isn't just another power-up storyline. It's a villain arc capable of taking down major heroes, on a scale we haven't really seen live-action Marvel attempt before. If Doomsday is setting the stage and Secret Wars raises the stakes even higher, don't be surprised if the true endgame of this entire saga has Phoenix fire burning through the middle of it. But here's what really gets me thinking. Every single time the Phoenix Force has shown up in live action so far, it's been treated as a twist, a last-minute reveal, something dropped on the audience in the final act without any real build-up. That's exactly why it never landed the way it should have. The Phoenix isn't a plot twist, it's a slow-burning inevitability. In the comics, you feel it coming from miles away. You watch Jean's control slip a little more with every crisis. You watch the people around her notice the cracks before she does, and by the time the Phoenix actually takes over, it feels less like a surprise and more like a countdown finally hitting zero. If Marvel Studios actually wants to get this right, that's the blueprint. Don't rush her into the Phoenix. Let us watch Jean Grey earn trust, lose control in small moments, rebuild herself, and slowly show cracks that mirror exactly what happened in that comic book origin we just walked through. Let audiences who've never opened a single X-Men comic feel the dread build naturally, the same way longtime readers did decades ago. That's how you turn a power-up into an event. event. And there's another layer here that a lot of people overlook. Jean Grey isn't just powerful because of what she can do. She's dangerous because of who she is. Unlike a lot of cosmic-level characters, her power is directly tied to her emotional state. Fear, grief, love, rage, all of it feeds directly into how much control she has over the Phoenix Force at any given moment. That means the writers don't need some galaxy-ending threat to make her arc terrifying. All they need is for the people she loves to be put in danger. Give her one more moment like losing Annie, one more moment like losing Sara, and you don't need a villain monologue to explain why the entire timeline should be nervous. That emotional wiring is exactly why the comic version of this story has lasted for decades without going stale. It's never really been about a woman with unlimited power. It's about a woman who has to fight her own mind just to stay herself, and who keeps losing that fight in ways that break your heart every single time. If the MCU leans into that instead of just treating her like a walking weapon, this could end up being one of the most human cosmic stories the franchise has ever told. So keep an eye on every small detail from here. The way she reacts under pressure, the way people around her start treating her differently, the way Xavier's name keeps almost coming up without actually being said out loud yet. None of that is filler. In a story like this, those tiny character beats are usually the real foreshadowing, long before anyone says the word Phoenix on screen. That's where I'll leave it for today. If you want to go deeper into X-Men lore before the MCU catches up, hit subscribe because we're just getting started.